Yes, mindfulness is a proven practice. It has been proven with lots of studies that people who can do mindfulness regularly are going to tend to have less stress, fewer emotional issues, and things like that. But mindfulness on its own is not a place to start, not unless someone is already fairly well emotionally regulated, fairly emotionally mature on their own. If somebody has trauma or is super stressed out or is stuck in that sympathetic dominance, that survival mode, fight or flight, most people call it, you can't just sit, whatever. And actually, the oming is a different thing, but that's oming on its own might actually be what's helpful. But that's something else. We'll talk about vagus nerve another time. The mindfulness is something that, because it gets our thinking mind out of the way, those of us that have high anxiety, high stress, trauma, things like that, it lets those other things we're not looking at come up. That's part of the problem. When I first started trying to practice mindfulness, I could not do it. Could not. And this was crazy because at the time, I had already done Silva method since I was age 13. Okay. I was a childbirth educator, Bradley method childbirth educator at that point in time. And I literally taught my students how to do relaxation techniques during labor. I was teaching this. I was doing guided relaxations. I was doing all that kind of stuff. When it came to that, like sit, just focus on your breath mindfulness, I would come out of a session. I remember going to group sessions, getting some introduction to this. Everybody else would be like, oh, I feel so wonderful. I'd be like, I feel worse. What's wrong with me? Like, seriously, I felt like I was just like everything had just like kind of come up and I was tense and I was anxious and I was like, what is wrong with me? Everybody else in this room is talking about how they feel great. And I'm like ready to go somewhere and cry. But the fact is, that's what happens with those of us that have those things that we haven't dealt with. If we're usually suppressing our emotions, mindfulness is going to bring it out. So, starting with mindfulness for somebody in that situation is a bad idea. That's why in the program that I'm launching, eventually we'll get to doing some mindfulness and some adaptations of mindfulness, because mindfulness isn't just sitting and focusing on your breath. Mindfulness is also anything that you do that you get fully immersed in, that you're living in the moment. That's also mindfulness. But we won't even get to that until we get later in the program, because we're going to start with the things like vagus nerve stimulation that's going to help calm down our sympathetic nervous system and get us into that more relaxed state. We're going to start with things like trauma release or tension release exercises, depending on which terminology you want to use, that help literally shake some of the yuck out of, the stored stress chemicals out of our muscles and out of the body. We're going to start with things that help us get to a more settled, grounded space first, at least back to what I like to call neutral, before we start trying to build on it. But people who haven't been through trauma, people who are not truly operating from a trauma informed lens, some people call themselves trauma informed. What they mean is they have this like up here intellectual understanding of what it means to work with somebody who's been through trauma. And yes, it's great that they have those classes, they do those things. I've seen a lot of people, very well intentioned people, very good hearts, who don't really get it because they've never experienced being so emotionally dysregulated that going ahead and counting on your fingers the things that you can see or hear or smell in the room, or brushing your teeth, not working. They've never been in that state where they were so off that even getting themselves to do something like that was a challenge, let alone, and even if you could, it didn't do anything. They don't really know how to work with trauma, and that doesn't mean that everybody that comes into my program has to be somebody who feels like they've had trauma or whatever. I'm just saying that I get it because I've been there. I've gone in, dealt with it, had all the blowups and all the wackiness and all the craziness and all the feeling out of control and all of that stuff, and worked through it and come out the other side. And so what I'm doing in the program is I am taking the nutrition knowledge that I have from my master's degree. I'm taking my personal experience, I'm taking the research, I'm taking the people that I've talked to and work with, and I'm putting that together to help guide you through which of those pieces are right for you and how can you apply those in habits that are going to actually change things. It's not a fast change. This is not one of those, I'm going to launch new content at you every single week. Not going to happen. We're going to release those short modules at the beginning of the month. Your job is going to be to go through those self-reflections, the self-assessments when we've got them, decide which things appear to be most relevant to you, and then come up with 1 to 3 short little habits. We're not talking about, I'm going to totally change everything about how I eat. You know it's not going to work. If you're like me, you've tried that before, it doesn't work. We're going to do 1 to 3 small habits, little changes that you can stick with, that you can work with. And when you fall off the wagon, because we all do, that's what our support community is here for. Because we'll do support groups, little pods of people within the bigger program that will be your personal support. We'll have big meetings, we'll have Q&A, we'll have an ongoing community in the meantime, and those Q&As are I'm there. I'm there. So you get to ask me questions too through all of this. But it's about the lasting change and figuring out what are those things that are right for you, not starting with a generic thing that they say works because of the research, but may not actually work for you. So I hope that you will take a chance on yourself and come join me.